Slides.
Yeah. Good evening. Thank you guys for coming out today. I know I don't look much like Judy Maddox. Unfortunately, she's homesick, so I'm pinch hitting. So bear with me here as we go through this, but we appreciate you coming out and a good turnout. We got a great program tonight. We want to start by thanking Ollie, the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute here at UNCA, for providing both publicity on our programs as well as this wonderful facility and the audio visual to allow us to have both online and people in person. And we'll have as many people as here, there'll be at least that many or more online. So when you ask for a question, we're going to make sure you use the mic because otherwise the people online can't hear you. And people online, if you have a question, put it in the chat and then that will be read for you at the end of the meeting. We're asking people to hold their questions until the end of the presentation. Again, we're the local Western North Carolina group of the Sierra Club. We're part of the North Carolina chapter and part of the National Sierra Club. And we have forms out on the table. We'd love to have you join the Sierra Club if you're not a member. We've got a sign-up sheet if you're not getting our twice-a-month newsletters, which tell you about our programs and possibly some action alerts. Please sign up before you leave so that we can let you know about what's going on. From that standpoint. Is that better? Okay. We also want to do a land acknowledgement. The Western North Carolina Sierra Club wants to acknowledge and show our respect because the land we're living on was protected and it's the ancestral land of the Cherokee, and they have protected this land for many generations. And now it's up to us to try to do the same. So we want to acknowledge their protection and what they've done. This is both, as I mentioned earlier, both an in-person and an online meeting. And all of our meetings are the first Wednesday of each month and always available both online as well as in person. And we do hikes. And if you're interested in going on a hike with us, you can go to our next one is a DuPont Forest to the 3 beautiful waterfalls there. And if you want to sign up, go to wncSierraclub.org and you can sign up for the hike and find out more information about it. We have a kids adventure club, which we take young people from maybe disadvantaged situations out into nature and where they can enjoy and see things that maybe they haven't had the opportunity to see. If you're interested in helping us out, we need volunteers to go on these outings with the young folks. And you can contact Judy Maddox at judymaddox15@gmail, and she'll be more than happy to have you join with us. We also are really fighting Duke Energy's latest plan, where they're proposing to open a lot of new gas plants instead of going with renewable energy and locking us into fossil fuel and climate change disruption for many years to come. And there's an opportunity right now to provide comments to the Public Utilities Commission to let them know that, no, that's not the way we want to go. It's not fair to me as a ratepayer to pay for something that's going to be never going to be around for the life that they say it's going to be because it's going to have to be shut down. So you can go to wncSierraclub.org and we've got talking points, and we've also got an opportunity where you can make comments online. We've also got cards out here on the table where a little postcard, you can fill in your information and we will mail it for you. So fill it out, leave it on the table, and we will mail those for you. Okay. Then Ken, come on up. Another Ken. We've got some exciting things going on this Saturday.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Thanks, Ken. Great to be with you. You may recall, for those of you who were here back in April, we had a presentation on the new Electrify Asheville Buncombe program. When we were here, it hadn't really launched, so you all got a preview on it. Now we're really in full launch mode. We've been out since the latter part of April, actually Earth Day, with the program that encourages people to take a look at their journey on electrification for their home and their property. And this all manifests online with something called Let's Go Electric, which is a platform for you to consider how best to make some changes in your home when and if you think the time is right to do so. And also to guide you through some things like federal incentives, financing, and other options. Local contractors are on board this. These are people who stepped up and wanted to be a part of this program under the auspices of the city and county. So we're pleased to actually bring something very tangible this coming Saturday. It's called Electrifair. Love for you all to come out. It starts at 11, goes till about 5. You can pick any time frame you'd like to be a part of it. And anytime you come, you're going to get some information. Demonstrations there, contractors there, ways to look, touch, and feel on some of the heat pumps and some of the remarkable technology that now enables you to electrify your home. And real quick, a few things are going to happen there. There's some panel sessions. There's some experts speaking about energy audits and ways to kind of improve your property with a audit, and then take a journey around electrification that sort of parses out which parts of your home could use the most help. And then there's some other things there. There's going to be some information about the financing. Buncombe and Asheville are fortunate to be the first Green Bank participants for some financing that is not what you're typically going to get from a contractor. The contractors are going to offer you financing, which is great, whatever it is that helps you enable your purchase. But this is an extra level of financing that is a little different for people who may not qualify under ordinary circumstances. So people there to talk about that. And then finally, some other things are going to happen there. Displays. Sugar Hollow is going to have a tiny home there, EV bikes, EVs, food trucks, this sort of thing. So it's all over at AB Tech in the Mission Conference Center. And if you come over anytime between 11 and 5, you'll find people of like-minded interests. And you'll find, I think, a lot of good information that kind of brings all this together under this new platform that's been created. We're fortunate that the investment was made in this by the city and county to help us propel this forward and to bring it to us. And we're really going to be poised more than any other community, really, certainly in North Carolina, to be able to tap into the incentives that are going to come online through the Inflation Reduction Act. And by the time we get to the new year, all that will tie together very nicely. But this will give you a preview and all that. It's the first Electrifair or any event of its type pretty much in the nation. There's been a few of these type things done, but it's fairly unique. This is our first one. We'd love to have some great attendance and everyone to come out and then tell us what they think about it, and we'll continue to improve these events. So that's pretty much everything about that. We do have some sponsors that I'd like to mention. Sugar Hollow Solar was one, Duke Energy is another one, Building Science Detectives, and Rhino Renewables Solar and Electric are all helping to put on this event. That's all I have for you. Thanks, Ken, for letting me make a plug. Take care.
And when you come on Saturday, stop by the Sierra Club table and say hello to us, because we will be there with a table and some of the same information you saw out here from there. We'll be there, and so we'd love to see you when you come. Yeah, you might put those, yeah, and raise your hand if you'd like one of the flyers. We have one up front here. Any other flyers? Not? Oh, wait, we got one in the front row here. Yeah, we'll put them on the desk for you on the way out. If you're too shy to raise your hand, you can still get one. Great. Okay. And instead of having a regular meeting in July, we're not. So don't show up here the first Wednesday of July. Instead, show up at Woodfin Riverside Park for our annual picnic. And it's a great location right on the river. And we'll have, bring a dish to share. We'll have veggie burgers on the grill. If you want something else on the grill, bring that. And again, bring a dish to share. We ask you, if you bring a dish to share, to list the ingredients. And we have a number of people that will be there that are vegetarian So you might consider having something that you bring that could be shared by everybody. But please come out. It's July 13th at Riverside Park on a Saturday from noon to 3 p.m. And we're also asking you to bring your own place settings. We're again trying to reduce our footprint, so we'd rather not have to use plastic glasses or paper plates. If you can bring your own and your own silverware, that's even better. Thank you. Now, time for the program. What you been waiting on? We are so fortunate to have Susan Bean from Mountain True. She's their Director of Transportation and Housing. I may have that reversed, but she is the expert on those, and not only in Buncombe County, but across most of Western North Carolina, which is the footprint for Mountain True. And they're doing some amazing things to try to help with two major problems we have: lack of affordable housing and also urban sprawl. So Susan, I'm going to turn it over to you.
I will. Great. Can you all hear me from here? Stay. I think I'm making it work. Thank you all so much for having me. Thanks, Ken, for the introduction and the warm welcome. As he said, Susan Bean. I am the Housing and Transportation Director with Mountain True. Many of you are probably familiar with Mountain True. There's our lovely logo. We are an environmental advocacy nonprofit that has been based in and serving Western North Carolina for over 40 years. And our mission is to protect, sorry, I'm going to read my notes before I just wing it. Oh. We are a grassroots nonprofit that champions resilient forests, clean waters, and healthy communities across the southern Blue Ridge Mountains. And Mountain True this past year launched a new program called Neighbors for More Neighbors, WNC. And that is the program and the work that I'm going to talk about tonight as a strategy to address urban sprawl. And I was intrigued by the slide that Ken had up there about Duke Energy and their carbon plan, and thinking about the way that that carbon plan could lock our region into decades of fossil fuel use in ways that are not visionary, that are not necessarily forward thinking, that don't sort of imagine a better future that we want for our region. And I would argue the same is true of the decisions that we make about our land use. The way that we build our houses and the way that we build our society, the buildings that we live and work in, those decisions make every bit as much of an impact on our natural environment and the ecology of this important region as the carbon plan. So as folks who are interested in taking care of, protecting, preserving the unique biodiversity of Western North Carolina and its natural heritage, its character, I would say we have got to be thinking about housing just as much as we do the way that we burn fossil fuels to generate the energy that powers our days. So, quick little aside there. So I think I've already basically made this case, but you might be wondering why an environmental organization is talking about housing. I think that is why. The way that we build our homes, what kinds of homes we build, the sizes of them, where we site them, all of that really makes a difference. And we have a lot of options in how we do that. By building, the case that we would make is that by building more diverse housing options closer to public amenities and where infrastructure already exists, we can meet our housing needs in a way that is more climate friendly and energy efficient, minimizes vehicle miles traveled, and reduces sprawling development that encroaches upon and threatens farms and forests across our region. So sprawling development trends threaten our landscapes, as I've already said. And in this image, you can see a bird's eye view of a nature preserve that's outside Charlotte, North Carolina. As we sprawl, we are turning forests like this one into developments like this. Sprawling suburban developments with roads and houses that interrupt species habitat, increase sedimentation runoff into our rivers, streams, and lakes, and require that people drive further distances to reach jobs, schools, and amenities are causing problems for our natural environment. But there's a growing movement to return housing choices to our city centers. the more that we can build in and up, the more we can protect the mountains and trees and ecosystems of our natural landscape. Additionally, if we can walk or take the bus or ride our bikes to meet our daily needs, we are generating far less greenhouse gas emissions, which further benefits our natural environment. I find this statistic pretty striking. It's a big number. From 1976 to 2006, land development in the North Carolina mountains increased 568%. From just over 34,000 acres to over 229,000 acres. And that is expected to increase another 63% by 2030. These projections came from a report that was released in 2010. So that was why I was projecting out to 2030. Honestly, if I had to guess, I would guess the projections are now even more, a higher percentage. But anyway, since 2010 and in those 30 years, the 1976 to 2006, population only increased 42%. So our developed land increased 568%, while our population growth increased 42%. And so the result, what that means is that there's an increase in the average number of developed acres per person, or our development footprint. So we are all just occupying more developed space in our region. This image is a map from a report released in 2022 from the American Farmland Trust. The report was called Farms Under Threat 2040. And it was showing projected conversion of agricultural land into developed land by 2040. They're predicting what will be lost by 2040 of agricultural land. In that time across the state, North Carolina is projected to lose 1.2 million acres of agricultural lands if our trends stay the same. So this is sort of business as usual, what that would look like. The red spots that sort of look like chicken pox all over this map, that is showing agricultural land that will be lost to development. This image, on the other hand, is showing runaway sprawl, which is what it would look like if low density housing is prioritized even more. And in that scenario, according to their analysis, we can expect to lose another 500,000 acres of farmland. Alternatively, when you see less chickenpox on this slide, they're calling better built cities, this is their analysis for a different projection, with land use reforms that encourage denser development patterns and protections for high value agricultural land, we could save over half, or over almost 1 million acres that could, instead of becoming developed land, could continue trapping greenhouse gases for us and not become pavement. So I think these slides, if you kind of bounce back and forth between the runaway sprawl and the better built cities, you can just see how much less red, how much sort of less diseased our region looks if we can lean into denser development. So with the advent, back in the early 1900s, we built small compact homes. This is my neighborhood. I know this image is kind of cluttered, but I caught a bunch of neighbors who looked cute because they had kids and dogs and, all the things. And this neighborhood was mostly built in the 1920s. And you can see sort of behind the people, like the houses are pretty small and they're pretty close together. We're sort of just right on top of each other. One story I like to tell about the pandemic, I was working in my office in the back of my house, and I sneezed, and my next door neighbor said, "Bless you," from her kitchen. And I was like, "I love you, but don't ever do that again." Let's pretend like we have a little more distance here. So we're really right on top of each other. And the lots are pretty small. The houses are pretty close to the street. So it's a pretty compact land use pattern, if you will. With the advent of the highway system, our cars allowed us to live in the suburbs for the first time in history. And with that came large single-family homes and government subsidies for mortgages, and it became more profitable for developers to build larger houses on cheaper land further from city centers. And then to accommodate that shift, we built new roads to get to those new developments, new grocery stores, we expanded our infrastructure, and all of that is expensive to maintain. Those roads, those sewer systems, the water pipes, the stormwater systems, like all of that is expensive for cities to create, build, and then maintain over time. And so you can kind of see the difference between the housing style here of the large detached single family homes. And I mean, presumably these are mostly single families, like, single households living in these homes rather than, duplexes or quadplexes, versus the smaller scale, tighter, compact development pattern that you see here. And again, this was in the 1920s. By this point, this would not work if we didn't have cars and highways. Couldn't walk to the grocery store like we can in my neighborhood. So this program, Neighbors for More Neighbors, WNC, seeks to address two different crises that we are facing today: the housing crisis and the climate crisis. So first, let's talk a little bit more about the housing crisis. It's hard to miss hearing about the housing crisis these days, from news reports on the need for affordable housing to more visible reminders of homelessness on our city streets. And there are a lot of complicated factors that have gotten us to this place. But one of the pieces of this puzzle is a lack of housing supply. There's just a literal shortage of homes. In an article called Deconstructing the Housing Crisis by Stephen Menendian, he writes that housing starts peaked in absolute terms in 1972. And housing starts refer to the number of new residential construction projects that have begun during any particular month. So the number of new homes that started getting built in a month. That number has been tracked over decades, and it has been declining for over 50 years. Even though the US population has grown by 60% in that time frame. So we're building less, but we're getting more people. The numbers are sort of vary widely in terms of what the actual shortage is nationally, but Freddie Mac estimates that it's 3.8 million homes that we're short. Fannie Mae is estimated is even higher at 4.4 million homes. We are basically just producing far less housing on a per capita basis than we did in previous generations. And the housing that we do produce is far more expensive on a per unit basis, so harder to reach or out of reach for families. The American dream of a single family home on a 1 acre lot with a white picket fence, that dream has gotten bigger and bigger. And the market has driven the housing industry to build larger and larger homes for the people who are able to afford them, which leaves a lot of people wishing that they could own a home, but not having access to that opportunity. The Bowen Report, also called the Western North Carolina Housing Needs Assessment, that came out in 2021, estimated our region's shortage at these statistics here. So that report said that we needed over 13,000 rental units across the region and over 7,000 rental units for seniors. For sale units, so not rental, but for sale, we were short over 3,000 units for families and over 2,000 units for seniors. So just so you can see these numbers, although they're big nationally, this is a problem right here in our own region. This doesn't only affect, California or New York City. There's a shortage all over the place, and we are not exempt from that. The other crisis that we are facing today, as you all know, is climate change. Our summers are getting hotter. Our rainstorms are getting less frequent, but more intense, leading to more droughts and also more floods. Some of our native species, like brook trout and hellbenders, are running out of suitable habitat in which to survive. And the list goes on. This image is a map showing where biodiversity is most at risk in America. And you can see a lot of dark red in our part of Appalachia. This map was created for a report by the New York Times, and in that report, they said that southern Appalachia is a hotspot for species at risk of vanishing. Where we live, how we build the structures that we live and work in, and how we move around our communities, as I said, has a huge impact on our natural environment. As reported by the EPA, the transportation sector is the largest contributor to man-made greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. And within the sector, light-duty vehicles, including passenger cars and light-duty trucks, make up 58% of those emissions. So the largest sector contributing to greenhouse gas emissions is transportation. Within that, it's basically you and me driving around day to day in our cars. Additionally, heating and cooling buildings accounts for about 43% of all energy use in the United States. So this trend of building larger houses further from city centers is having huge impacts on greenhouse gas emissions in our country, and therefore accelerating climate change impacts on our natural environment. RMI, who is a leading climate data analysis organization, nonprofit organization, released a report last year that was looking at land use reforms and potential land use reforms and how that could change projections for various things. So in this report, they focused on 3 fast-growing US metro areas: Austin, Texas, Charlotte, North Carolina, and Denver, Colorado. Their analysis found that land use reforms can reduce vehicle miles traveled by up to 13%. Building energy use could be reduced by up to 16%, and local greenhouse gas emissions would reduce by up to 14%, averaged across those regions, relative to the business as usual land use development patterns. These findings, they said, are consistent with their estimate that the United States could avoid 100 million to 200 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent annually if ambitious land use reform strategies were adopted nationwide. So coming back to that Duke Energy carbon plan that we were talking about, if we did these land use reforms, it would equate to retiring up to 50 mid-sized coal-fired power plants, or about 20% of the country's remaining coal fleet. And I think that's pretty interesting because Mountain True and the Sierra Club worked really hard a number of years back to retire the Asheville coal plant. And it felt like such a huge victory. I wasn't on staff of the organization when that happened, but I know it was a huge campaign, took a lot of work, a lot of grassroots organizing, and it felt like a really big victory, and it was. And so the prospect that the equivalent of 50 of those going away, if we could adopt some land use changes and change our land use pattern, I think is pretty interesting. And the reforms that they were modeling are pretty modest. They don't entail huge changes to urban form or rebuilding entire neighborhoods or erecting 20-story buildings. They comprise measures such as upzoning, which is removing restrictions on multifamily housing. So some of the like small apartment buildings that are in my neighborhood now, 6-plexes, 8-plexes, those things are often not allowed in our current single-family zoned areas. But if we changed those rules and allowed those kinds of buildings and structures to be built, that would sort of look and feel just like it did in the 1920s, which could be nice. I like it. Urban infill is another example of the kind of land use reform that they're talking about or analyzing here, which would be building more housing on underutilized parcels, land parcels, and then transit-oriented development. So building taller residential buildings and commercial clusters closer to high-quality transit. So all these things feel pretty attractive and to me feel kind of within reach. You know, it's not like a huge, grand, dramatic change to our communities, but really kind of going back to a pattern of development that we used to embrace and enjoy. So like I said, the Neighbors for More Neighbors WNC program that Mountain True has started is presenting one piece of the solution to our housing crisis and our climate crisis, and proposing that we change the way that we build our houses and share our communities. We're advocating for more housing choices to be built within our existing neighborhoods where infrastructure and amenities already exist. If we can simply welcome more neighbors, more members to our community, and share access to our parks, schools, roads that we've already built, we can create opportunities for more friends and families to have a piece of the American dream without expanding our carbon footprint further and further across our mountain landscape. So now with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eva Snyder, who is a volunteer for our Neighbors for More Neighbors WNC program. And she is going to cover the rest of the presentation and talk a little bit more specifically about some of the land use best practices that we as an organization are championing.
Thanks, Susan. Is this working? Okay, cool. Cool. Stand as close as the baby's letting me stand to this thing. So I'm Eva. I grew up in Asheville. My family moved here right before I started kindergarten. Went through K through 12 here. I moved away for college, but my husband, we moved back about 7 years ago. And we started looking for a house to buy in the area, you know, a thing that when you have a career, you think you might be able to do, and started realizing how out of control the housing market in the Asheville area specifically had gotten since I'd moved away. And that led me to start asking some why questions, digging in a lot to housing policy and kind of what shaped how we got here from a housing perspective. As someone who also cares a lot about the environment, I started kind of looking at why those two things are connected and was really excited to get involved with Neighbors for More Neighbors when Mountain True started the program last summer. So I'm excited to be here and talk about some of the concrete steps that we as a city can take to kind of mitigate some of these issues that Susan was talking about. So some best practices in plain language terms to allow more homes on every lot that currently allows a single family detached house. to allow one or more accessory dwelling units on all residential lots, which the city of Asheville has started to make some progress towards. And to allow apartments or mixed-use developments in more places. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about along transit corridors, along places where infrastructure exists to support that. And then, is this my clicker? Cool. Other things. To allow to allow apartments and mixed-use developments along transit corridors to include more homes. To remove or reduce minimum lot sizes and allow fee simple lot division, so smaller lots. To allow manufactured homes everywhere. Manufactured homes are actually one of the, I think, the largest source of market-driven affordable housing in the United States. So something that a lot of us don't really think about, but are a really accessible entry point for folks with limited means to access the housing market without subsidies. And then to allow very small homes. So we're not talking about necessarily building huge things, but if we let people build smaller, they can build more affordably and they can build more densely together. So missing middle housing, the city of Asheville conducted a study with Opticos last summer to evaluate how the city of Asheville has sort of stopped building what we call missing middle housing. So we've got on one side detached single family homes, and on the other side, mid-rise residential apartment buildings. And missing middle is kind of everything that exists in between that, where it is more complex to build than a detached single family home, and not as lucrative in aggregate as a mid-rise apartment building. So we've largely seen developers stop building these housing typologies, even though, to Susan's point, they're some of the types of housing that are at market rate attainable to more people and make our neighborhoods more interesting. I live in Montford right now as a renter, and there are a lot of sort of hidden multifamily units all the way up to 6, 8 plexes, that kind of thing, in Montford, that fit really well in with the single family homes in the neighborhood and provide walkable, but more attainable opportunities for housing. So here is a slide with just some pictures of different missing middle housing types that exist in the Asheville area. So we've got a duplex in the top left, and then the top right, we've got a house with a detached accessory dwelling unit. We've got a duplex right next to a smaller unit. And then we have what I think is a 6-plex in the lower right. It could be a 12-plex if we didn't know what's in the back of it. And so what are some types of projects that Neighbors for More Neighbors would support? On the big end, a project we would support, or we do support, is Project Aspire, which is a large mixed-use development proposed for Center City, Asheville. I mean, it's the edge of downtown Asheville, and is a project between the YMCA and the Baptist Church. And the speaker notes have the number of dwelling units that this would add, and I don't remember them off the top of my head, but it's a large project, adds a lot of housing, and adds that housing in a place where people can feasibly get to work and amenities without having to rely on a vehicle. This project is currently on pause because they're having a hard time funding the parking requirements that are still being added to the project. So we'll see how it moves forward, whether it gets revised or what happens. But a large mixed-use development in a downtown environment is something that we definitely support to reduce sprawl. Some other types of projects that we would support and that we would support zoning changes to allow people to build by right in the city of Asheville are things like pocket neighborhoods or cottage courts. So On the left, we've got a co-housing community in Seattle made up primarily of small duplexes that are built very densely together and have a small shared parking lot that is outside, kind of on the periphery of this area. And so they're able to build at a denser units per acre by building these smaller houses close together and provide sort of a sense of community. This is like a small project typology. And another is, I'm not sure if it's a sixplex or a larger unit, but this is a multi-family housing type at the top of Montfort Avenue near Liberty Cafe. All I'm able to find officially is that it's 5+. I have friends who live there. The units are pretty small. It could be more than 6. I don't know. Let me know if you do. But this is a project that fits in the neighborhood, fits the neighborhood character, wouldn't immediately look like multifamily, but is providing a lot of people with housing that's accessible for college students and recent grads. So those are not an exhaustive list of types of projects that we would support, but Neighbors for More Neighbors is really advocating for greater housing choice and for building in and up rather than building out and developing more of our virgin forests into suburban neighborhoods and suburban high rises that are dependent on cars. So.
Thanks, Eva. And the last thing that I would add is that there are a lot of ways that you can get involved with Neighbors for More Neighbors, WNC, and Mountain True, should you be interested in supporting this kind of work in our community. We've got a sign-up list over here that I brought if you would like to get our emails. We've also got stickers if you want to put a bumper sticker on your car that says that you like neighbors. I would be so excited about that. We have a team of volunteers that meets a couple times a month and discusses different strategies, education opportunities, and tries to promote this program in other ways to a broader audience. There are action alerts. If you do get our emails, we will announce calls to action and say, tell city council, tell the county, tell, a different county outside of this region, to allow density, to just allow more housing in our city and town centers and to prevent sprawl. So there's a lot of different ways that you can get involved with us. And then lastly, if you would like to support Mountain True financially, you can become a member of Mountain True by making a donation to us. And that certainly supports our work and our programs, as is true of all nonprofits like the Sierra Club as well. So those are ways that you can get involved. Here is my contact information. Should you have questions, I also have my card over here next to the sign-in sheet. So you're welcome to grab that. But at this point, our prepared presentation is over and we are excited to take questions from any of you that have them and bounce between the folks that I'm looking at and the folks who I assume are online and have questions. Start with you in the front with and you have to get the microphone, which Can you wait until we get the microphone to you? I've been told that's important.
You do need it.
We do.
I have a microphone.
The people
The
online
the
can't hear
people
you.
online I know. So you say, my name is Joe, Downtown Joe. I turned 84 yesterday. I'm going to 116 more years to have housing. I've helped a lot of people. That's what turns me on. You showed us a community that's close together. How much do those houses cost? How many older people are poor? How many people of colors are poor? How many women are poor? How can I only need a kitchen and a bedroom? That's all. How can I afford to be around and not be out where the Pacific fire people and the Atlantic water people are coming to Western North Carolina to get 10 acres or 15 acres in their palace? How the heck can I afford to continue who I am and afford it?
So one thing I would say to that is that if we can allow more smaller homes to be built in parts of our community where you can access transit or you can walk to get to things like the grocery store or the pharmacy,
How much are they going to cost?
right, those decisions, if we build that kind of housing, it is typically more attainable than the large detached single-family homes that are driving the market to produce more and more unaffordable homes. So there's subsidized affordable housing, which we support as well. But if we just changed the way that we developed our land and the way that we used our land to create more diverse housing types and more options in the right places, that would impact the affordability across the spectrum of all the housing market. And there has been research and studies that have demonstrated that if you add more housing supply to the stock of existing homes, then prices will not go up nearly as quickly as in the areas where we are not allowing more homes to get built. So it is not an immediate answer, but building more housing, allowing more dense development does help affordability in the long run. There was another one. Yeah, Richard?
What position does Mountain True and Neighbors for Neighbors take on short-term rentals? And maybe you can tell us why short-term rentals, how they impact the problem.
Yeah. So Chris Joyelle, who is here in the front row with me, is our Director of Healthy Communities at Mountain True. And he and I both made public comment to the Buncombe County Planning Board recently when they were just considering a revision to their policies and regulations on short-term rentals. We would like to have reasonable regulations imposed by the county on short-term rentals. Short-term rentals do eat up some of our housing stock. It is very difficult and time-consuming to build houses. It takes a long time to add housing supply to the market. It is instant that housing can come off of the market by becoming a short-term rental opportunity for vacationers. So as a piece of the many different solutions that we need to create more housing in the right places, limiting short-term rentals, not eliminating them, like we can keep some for sure. We know that there are people who rely on the income that they are getting from having a short-term rental on their property. But if we limit the number of those that are allowed in our community, that would preserve some of our existing housing stock for long-term tenants. And if we let it continue to just go wild and have more and more of those existing homes converted to short-term rentals, it pushes further and further of our residents, it pushes more and more of our residents further and further from the places where they need to live to be able to get to and from jobs and schools and all of those things. So we support reasonable regulations on the short-term rental industry across our communities for those reasons. And if Chris, if you have additions, feel free to jump in. Great. Yeah, online, I guess.
I have two questions online. First one from Virginia Duque. How can we both support more housing, more neighbors and higher density housing, and at the same time preserve urban green spaces and a mature tree canopy?
That's a great question and one that we get a lot. I would argue that housing and tree canopy in a dense land use pattern can coexist. We could bounce back to that slide that I have from the 1920s where our houses are really tightly packed together, and yet there are great big old trees in our neighborhood. You can absolutely have both of those things at the same time. And yet in the other picture that I showed of the large houses on, here, let's just bounce back to that one. It's gonna take a second. Large houses on large lots, you can see there are trees there too, but the amount of land that is devoted to large grass areas and also the driveways, like I love this, I think I have a pointer, this 15-passenger van here. Like, look at the scale of this driveway relative to that van. Like all of these houses have these, massive driveway footprints in front of them. And we are sprawling because our cars make that possible. And the way that we are choosing to use our land, to utilize our land for things like massive driveways, large homes on large grassy lots, isn't necessarily conducive to an incredible tree canopy. So I think we can have a great urban tree canopy and dense housing. We can build in and up, like I've been saying. And so you can have duplexes, triplexes, sixplexes that build up and take advantage of vertical space, but you can still have that building next to a really large maple tree or a beautiful oak tree. These things are not mutually exclusive. Come on here, like, you add that.
Sorry, yeah, I was just gonna say, particularly if we in dense urban core reduce the parking minimums. So a lot of the time when we build more dwelling units, the city requires that we build more parking. And a lot of the time trees are cut down, not necessarily to build the house itself, but to build parking that's required for a 3-bedroom house.
And the more that we spread out like this, the more farmland and forest land and canopy, tree canopy that we are losing to build this way. So those are my answers.
I'll do one more on online and then we'll take more from the room. From Chloe Post. Hi, considering social equity and how people of color are disproportionately affected by climate change issues and gentrification, how would we avoid these developments becoming part of the gentrification issue and further affecting people of color concerning climate change? Apartments in cities are getting smaller and smaller, yet the prices are exponentially rising.
That is a good question and is a complicated question. Just as my answer before to Downtown Joe, adding more housing to our overall supply of housing stock, there has been research to demonstrate that adding houses, adding units does beneficially impact affordability of homes across the board. So to the question about people getting priced out, adding housing supply can genuinely help with that potential for displacement. Gentrification is another piece of this equation that is complicated. We don't want to disinvest in communities of color. The opposite is true. We want to invest in improvements and things like parks and amenities in our historically Black neighborhoods, in our communities that have a majority Latino population. We want those benefits, greenways, et cetera, the things that we all like in our neighborhoods. We want those to happen in those communities as well. Those things inevitably drive up prices. So Mountain True also advocates for protections for existing residents and anti-displacement measures and policies that governments can enact to help existing residents, like communities of color who might be vulnerable to displacement, be able to stay in their homes and stay in their communities while we also invest in the infrastructure and add the nice amenities to those communities. So we need both of these things at the same time. We need to create protections for existing residents and create ways to preserve existing housing stock and keep residents in those houses. And we also need to add supply to affect beneficially affordability across the board. Eva.
Another anti-displacement strategy that was called out by Opticos in their study at the city of Asheville last year is just ensuring that changes that we make to zoning to allow for greater housing density to be built are broad-based and are not concentrated in neighborhoods that are historically disadvantaged. So if we only upzone areas that have historically been underinvested in or in our legacy neighborhoods, then we are going to see more development happen in those areas, and that might impact driving people out. One thing that we can do to mitigate that is to make sure that we're also making the same changes at the same time in some of our wealthier established neighborhoods, like in North Asheville, like Kenilworth. And so we're making sure that we're also creating opportunities for more people to move to those opportunity neighborhoods and to do so at a more affordable price point with a smaller housing unit.
I would just add that
The one
gentrification is happening without doing any of this stuff. So it's not like if we don't do this, gentrification stops. It's happening at a rapid rate in Asheville.
The last thing I would add to that answer, I think it was Chloe, also mentioned that climate change is disproportionately affecting communities of color. And I would argue that the case that we are making for better, smarter land use development patterns is going to mitigate some of those negative impacts of climate change on a broad spectrum.
We're not the only ones with this
problem, obviously. This is a trend all over the country. The same problems. We've got our own unique situation here. In many ways, we have a city that is not so big, and we can build in resilience for climate change better than other cities can. And I think most cities are going to have to take an approach, something like this. The thing I see that is missing in most cases is we've got de facto green space all around, empty lots, so forth. We're losing our tree canopy at a significant rate now. And that's because the city hasn't had very good standards. And developers go in and take just level stuff. I mean, that's the easiest way to build. So we're going to have to focus on how we can, like parking minimums is one of the approaches that will help. Changing that, giving more flexibility, making development more flexible. And the acceptance of neighborhoods is another thing that is a issue, you know. Established neighborhoods usually don't want, you know, all of a sudden to be have larger units put right in those neighborhoods. But I think there are ways to do that, particularly with the urban centers approach and then working into neighborhoods as well. But I think there's going to have to be a lot of thought about standards and how we can connect green spaces and at the same time do this. Look, I think that's missing right now. There's just not a good, we need to put some models out to show how that can work. Because people are raising a lot of questions about this that I know say, well, how is this going to work? We're just going to make the city denser and wipe out, you know, what's there now. So let's, you know, it's a great idea. I think it'll work, but the standards have got to be realistic.
Yeah, I think that
Make-
there are separate policies that can protect and preserve our urban tree canopy. And we have some of those tools at the city to do that. But I think that that is a separate suite of policies and tools than what kind of housing we allow in our communities. And the more that we can keep smaller footprints and build in and up on the existing land that we have that is developable, the more we can, again, have that coexistence of urban tree canopy that, again, is protected by other policies, but also allowing more homes for more people to move into our communities and for our kids, the next generation, to be able to stay here in these communities rather than having to be displaced. And the more that we don't allow housing to be built within our city and in our existing neighborhoods where we already have infrastructure, the more we are inevitably driving sprawl and accelerating sprawl, which then leads to all the other climate change negative consequences that I mentioned before. And I think I really empathize with folks who struggle to welcome infill in their own neighborhoods and their communities, right? It's hard to see and to feel change and to fear the loss of the open space that is around you or a tree on that particular parcel. That is, we see that, we feel that, it is real, it is a change that is hard to adjust to. What we don't see and what we don't feel is the loss of that agricultural land or that farmland or that forest that is further outside of the city boundaries in places that don't have stormwater mitigation strategies, that don't have transit systems, that don't have, you know, other tools that the city has to create that coexistence of urban tree canopy and a walkable community. So I think it's hard to accommodate that growth within our communities, but I think if we can think bigger picture and more broadly about the impact to our planet, in addition to just the impacts that we might feel on our street or in our block or in our neighborhood by allowing more neighbors and more houses to be within our community, you can start to sort of weigh those trade-offs and those pros and cons a little bit differently. And I think that there are real benefits, as I've already said.
Susan? Yeah. First, I really applaud what you folks are doing. I came out and saw you folks at the AB Tech thing a few months ago. It's great. Couple of comments, if I might. Resilience, you know, we've talked about resilience, the value of it. It's almost given us a concept we all approve without even thinking. But what we need to understand is resilience is on both sides of the NIMBY fence. The NIMBY concept is extraordinarily resilient concept. And what I've found, I've been working in aging in place issues around housing, particularly ADUs for the last 3 or 4 years with ARP and HOPE, Housing Opportunities for Aging in Place. And we've found that, what would seem with the ADU is almost, an automatic. Why wouldn't you take this child and feed it, we got enormous pushback from folks that, first of all, won't cop to being a NIMBY standard, but they'll find all kinds of reasons to which basically add up at the end of the day to that same ethic of NIMBY. It's fine, but not here, thank you. So I would encourage you to do more of what you started in the slide program, where you've got some of the mathematics down of, what are the trade-offs that happen over the years. If you continue doing what you're doing now, you're going to lose certain things. A lot of folks have moved to Asheville for the sense of spaciousness, view of the mountains, et cetera. I find whenever my group gets involved in discussion of this with them, they shut down quickly because they say, you're going to screw up the whole thing. I mean, this is a beautiful place and you're going to mess up our view. You're going to crowd this block, et cetera. For example, the ADU concept, in contrast to what I think you said earlier, ADUs are by right allowed. But being able to do an ADU on your lot requires conformance with the parking requirements, sewage issues, and so forth. A lot of details that frankly are really worthy of focus, because those are the real barriers that are going to ultimately come and face you as you peel that onion down and get deeper into this issue. Second, the gentrification issue this gentleman mentioned, I think is great. We ran into Shiloh folks big time at a couple of meetings. Lovely people. They really want to protect their neighborhood. They want to protect it from other folks having control over their space. And they see this idea of freeing up space for new development as somehow a shell game, that's going to exclude them. And so I think there's a real need to invest some time with those communities, those legacy neighborhoods, if you will, in understanding the concepts that they use to talk about their issues and, the language, and getting a handle on that so that you don't start out with talking about the planetary issues at a large macro level, and they're really concerned about a really, trench warfare issue of, I want control over my neighborhood. I do not want developers in here screwing it up, thank you. I don't want to see people profit off of where we've lived for 3 generations. So I think that's worthy of time, building those relationships and understanding the language and concepts that they use. We didn't do a good job of it. I've gone to a couple of meetings with those folks thinking, basically the core issue is so wonderful that they would embrace it somehow if they only understood it, and found that I wasn't talking at all the same language or concepts that they use. So for what it's worth, I think that's worthy of homework.
I appreciate your homework assignment. What I hear you saying, among other things, is that you agree with the approach that we are taking and helping people see the science and the trade-offs of better land use planning, more efficient land use for housing rather than urban sprawl, and helping people understand that. To your point about NIMBYism being strong, and for those who maybe aren't familiar with that term, NIMBY is an acronym. It stands for Not in My Backyard. You're certainly right. And that speaks to what I was saying earlier, that I empathize with people's challenge that we all have on embracing change and welcoming new neighbors, new development into our communities. I think helping people think about the benefits to that kind of development can help people think maybe outside the box and a little bit bigger picture, and a little bit more about the broader implications of that kind of development. I hear you on Shiloh, and we are working with the legacy neighborhoods, but I don't know that, I wouldn't say that Shiloh feels any differently than my own neighborhood. So to think that we need to spend more time in Shiloh telling them or helping them understand what the benefits of development are, as opposed to my community in North Asheville that is equally as opposed to developers making money from infill development, I would push back on that a little bit, but I do think there are a lot of legitimate concerns from the Shiloh community and other historically Black neighborhoods that have been decimated by previous generations of urban planning decisions and land use and zoning decisions that have been put onto our community and had the most negative impacts on those more vulnerable communities. So I think that they have, I think, room and legitimacy and validity to express concerns in a way that perhaps my own neighborhood doesn't have as much history to lean on and saying that we shouldn't have infill development, we shouldn't have more housing or more neighbors in our community. But I do think that some of those concerns and fears about change, fears about loss of urban canopy, traffic, you name the sort of list of common concerns, those are pretty universal. And I think all of us can feel that on one level or another. And I think that the message that Neighbors for More Neighbors WNC is carrying forward is trying to help folks think about, yes, there will be impacts to individual neighborhoods if we allow more development there. But if we do it, then maybe we won't have so much chickenpox across our region. And that is a valuable thing to think about alongside perhaps some additional traffic in your neighborhood.
Hello. Hi.
So maybe you here in the first black t-shirt and then we'll get to you in the blue. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. He just,
Shout out to Eva for bringing up parking.
sorry, we'll
minimums.
hit you next.
Yeah.
Sorry. Great.
Okay. Thank you for bringing up parking minimums. I live in West Asheville, and I have about an eighth of an acre that would be very developable as missing middle housing, except that I'd have to pave the rest of it at the moment to provide parking in a walkable neighborhood where I would prefer to provide parking to the blue collar people who work in the service industry down the street. So my question is sort of related to that whole parking issue, and maybe it's not super germane to this specific conversation, but I see as low-hanging fruit relative to the NIMBY activity that's happening. All of these suburban commercial corridors that we have around Asheville. I went to CNU a couple of weeks ago in Cincinnati, and the most inspiring thing that I saw was a conversation about grand boulevards, where in Silicon Valley, they're turning a bunch of these big box stroads into housing and mixed use development and whatnot. And I think very excitedly about the metastasization of car dependency that's going down Hendersonville Road, Patton West out towards Home Depot, and Brevard Road and all of those places. You have all of this built-in potential with a bunch of blue collar jobs and no housing proximate to it. So I'm wondering if Mountain True is doing anything to sort of try to capitalize on that opportunity.
Certainly, and I think this image, oh, I don't know which direction it was in, but the proposals that, nope. Anyway, the transit-oriented development. There was a picture on that somewhere. Oh yeah, here we are on the far right hand. Our corridors, which is what I think you're talking about, Patton Avenue, Hendersonville Avenue, Hendersonville Road, excuse me, already have transit. We would like the city to invest more into those transit corridors, as in get greater frequency of bus service on Hendersonville Road to access a lot of housing that is actually coming in South Asheville. I also sit on the Planning and Zoning Commission for the city of Asheville, and we have approved a number of large projects for dense housing development in South Asheville. And I'm excited about that because it is on a transit corridor. However, Mountain True advocates for the city to increase investments into that transit system so that those folks too could perhaps have alternative transportation options rather than driving personal vehicles from South Asheville into the city center or wherever they need to get to. So we certainly advocate for better land use on those primary corridors, main corridors, more dense development in those places, and additional transportation investments to make that kind of housing in those places have additional options for getting around. Hopefully that answers your question. Great.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you and Eva for your presentations to everyone who shared ideas this evening.
Yeah, you just got to.
Thank you both for everything you presented, to everyone who shared ideas tonight. I just wonder if you can take a moment to get a little bit more practical. And if you were looking at the next 6 to 12 months, can you share a little bit specifically about what Neighbors for More Neighbors and Mountain True, I'm familiar with some of the stuff Mountain True is doing, but just to put a little bit finer point on what actions look like in the near future.
Sure. Presentations like this are a big piece of what we do. Honestly, I spend a lot of time talking to audiences, hoping folks can think about these issues differently. We are working on a communication strategy that will have opinion pieces going into local papers all across Western North Carolina, letters to the editor, other ways to kind of get this message out there. And on a policy front, we are really supporting the missing middle housing initiative that the city of Asheville is going through right now. It keeps getting delayed. So in terms of the 6 to 12 months, it's unclear to me when the timeline will really hone in on when the city council will vote on one of the missing middle reforms that the study recommended that they released last year. One of the ones that might be coming up soon is the cottage court policy changes, the flag lot changes, and also the proposal to have backyard lots as a new option in our city ordinances, such that if you have a large parcel that you could subdivide in half and have your backyard become a separate lot that doesn't have street frontage, but can be sold and financed separately for an additional home on that land. That is a new concept that doesn't exist in a lot of places, but our city staff and city council are looking at that, and we would be very supportive of that policy. So those are a few of the things that we are working on in the next 6 to 12 months, if that helps.
Yeah, we have a question online.
The parking minimum question, yeah, is one of the reforms that the missing middle housing study recommended, but I don't know that it's coming before council very soon. I think the top priority ones that the city staff is bringing forward, I don't think included parking changes, but I could be wrong.
Sorry, one of the changes that is proposed to the ADU regulations as part of this package that will be coming before council sometime this year, hopefully, is a change that will reduce parking requirements for backyard lots and cottage courts and will eliminate additional parking requirements for accessory dwelling units.
And this is why we need volunteers. They can answer questions with me.
So one of the online questions, Emma Castleberry,
Emma.
who's opposing this kind of concentrated development in favor of urban sprawl? What do we do about it?
I mean, what we do about it, Mountain True Field is run this program. It is shocking to me how much opposition there is to these concepts, because I think in theory they sound good, and then when specific proposals come forward for allowing multifamily housing in an existing neighborhood, the amount of opposition to that kind of development is really intense. The direct corollary, if we don't allow that kind of denser development pattern in our cities, is that there's going to be urban sprawl. And so that is the trade-off. And so when folks and when communities really resist that kind of development pattern changing in their communities, they are supporting sprawl, even if that's not how they want to frame it, right? It is a very difficult thing, I think, to hold all these concepts together at the same time. But we have a lot of families who need homes, and we support creating homes for members of our community who don't have a place to live and can't afford a place to live because we don't have enough of them. So we support building more housing, and we think where that housing should go is in our neighborhoods where there's already infrastructure. And that is where often a lot of people don't want it in their community. They think, yes, I support housing. We should totally build housing, but not here. It should happen somewhere else. And somewhere else inevitably is in the places that are not already developed. So our farmland and our forests across the region.
Are we just assuming that existing infrastructure is adequate to contain this infill or higher density? The only thing I've really heard in terms of that is let's encourage transit or develop more transit. But Asheville has significant limitations, both historically because they failed to invest in infrastructure, and geographical in the type of terrain we live in. it sounds to me like at the same time you're doing this, you need to really look at the fact that the water systems haven't been upgraded in forever. It's really hard to improve streets in a lot of locations. And
That is
I'm hearing-
absolutely true. We do need to continue to invest in upgrading our existing infrastructure, and additional investments into our water system, our sewer system, our stormwater systems, our roads. All of those things do need continued maintenance and improvements for sure. If we continue sprawling, we are creating more infrastructure that our already stressed and strained systems need to then support. So when we have these large homes on large lots that are farther away from our city and town centers, some government entity, it could be the city, it could be the county, it could be, an unincorporated area, like needs to maintain more road mileage and more water systems or more stormwater pipe systems. I agree that our existing infrastructure systems do need to be invested in and maintained and upgraded. And that is its own challenge that we as a community need to find solutions for. I don't think that pushing development further and further from town and city centers is the solution to maintaining our systems of infrastructure, because I think it just adds more strain and stress on an already stressed system. Yeah, certainly true.
We didn't grow up in a housing project.
Eva had another response to that, so I'm going to let her jump in here before we get to another question.
This is just really a quick comment that I think that a lot of people have the assumption that because we have a lot of topography, we're not super well suited to train systems and therefore assume that our transit system will always be terrible. I did live for 7 years in the city of Pittsburgh, which has a lot of the exact same topography that we have here. And during that time, I lived all but 1 year without a car, and I got rid of the car because it was more trouble than it was worth, because the city has a good bike infrastructure and has a really great bus infrastructure with ready, frequent service. So I think that it is possible for the city of Asheville to have a functioning transit system.
Please forgive me, but we live in paradise out in western North Carolina. And anytime I want to get picked up and shut up, I go out there. People in the Atlantic water, people that are rich, people in the Pacific, fire people, are coming. We don't want to live in housing projects. I'm afraid we're talking about something that we aren't prepared and may not be able to control.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I think you make a really excellent point that we do live in a really attractive region in the United States, and particularly as climate change impacts are felt more and more across the country, more people are going to want to move to Western North Carolina. We live in a great place. The trouble that we need to all be aware of is that a lot of the time when folks are coming here, particularly if with the new age of remote work, people are coming with means, and they're coming and they're going to be able to price current residents out of the market. So what we need to do is make sure that we're building enough new housing stock that we have room to accommodate those folks, because they're not going to not come because housing prices go up in Asheville. Who's going to be impacted by the changes in the housing market are going to be the folks who already live here. So we need to make sure we're creating enough housing to support everybody.
Another one from online, Beth Ecke. In South Asheville, there are many proposed and newly built apartments on Long Shoals Road and beyond. The outcome is more cars and more congestion. Any thoughts? I mean, I know that that particular area is on the transit lines. But it's still, when you build these large apartment complexes, even though it's on those transit lines, you end up with more cars. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, as I said earlier, I serve on the Planning and Zoning Commission for the city of Asheville, and we have approved in my tenure on that commission a number of those apartment complexes. And I thought it was really interesting when the city staff presented their report to commission about why they thought that location was a good site for that kind of multifamily housing complex. They pointed to things like there's a school directly across the street. Here are the transit stops. Here are the sidewalks that already exist. You can walk to the grocery store that's right next door. The amenities that are so close to that particular, I forget which one this project was where they were, anyway. We have to build more housing in and near our city centers and where we already have infrastructure and amenities. That is truly a better alternative than sprawling. And when we have housing in and near those things that we need to get to on a day-to-day basis, then people have options for transportation that are not their personal vehicles. And it's exciting that way. You can bike, you can walk, you can take your scooter, you can ride the bus. There are so many other ways to get around simply because of your proximity to the kinds of things that you're going to need to access. And I think if we are held up by the prospect of traffic in our own communities and say that we cannot accommodate any more humans because we're only thinking about the cars that are going to be in that neighborhood, we are again not thinking about the impacts of where those humans will live and what the climate impacts will be of those cars driving from much further away from our city to get to the amenities that otherwise, if we allowed that development to happen there, they could walk or they could bike or they could take their scooter. So it's not great. Like, we live in a city and sometimes traffic is a part of the picture and I don't love it either. I live on Merriman Avenue and the intense heated debate about the proposed road diet on Merriman Avenue in the last couple of years, you guys may have followed. And it has slowed traffic down. There's now more traffic on Merriman Avenue because there are less lanes. And I have been shocked by what a delight it is as a driver to be on that road because it is safer. So we have bike lanes now. It's easier and more pleasant for me to walk my dog on the sidewalk on Merriman Avenue when I'm trying to make a loop from my house because the cars are going slower. And then when I am in my car as a driver, the people that are not flying up behind me and then passing me at the last second to get into the other lane when I'm waiting to turn left and I feel like I'm going to die, I don't have that experience anymore. But it is slower. It now takes me a couple minutes longer to get from my house to anywhere else because there is now more traffic. And it has been interesting to me to experience that infrastructure change and say, like, sometimes traffic can be good, not all the time, but if we are going to live in cities, we are going to have to share our spaces. We're going to have to share our roads. We're going to need to share the amenities that we have access to, and to prevent other people from sharing those really has a lot of negative externalities that are harder to visualize and comprehend. But I think that the trade-offs are worth it.
If I might, two more comments about money. This gentleman over here about infrastructure development. Absolutely. One way you pay for that, though, is by having more households that are paying taxes. Infill brings in more taxes to help keep the wheels of progress going in the city. Second, the issue of the ADUs again, briefly. If we go through the flag lot thing and we get release of some of the restrictions around that kind of stuff, one of the issues still is going to remain the ability for the homeowner to sell that lot for a development so that the person who buys that ADU can in turn sell it as part of their estate or whatever. Also getting financing, HUD financing requires certain legal clear title to that piece of lot. If you don't have that, you're not going to be able to secure financing. So working with the city around the issue of allowing these ADUs as we develop them, hopefully, to also have the capacity to carry title to those properties by being legally defined as a separate property, I think is important.
Yeah, that's the backyard lot concept I was talking
Right.
about earlier. So if we allow backyard lots, instead of it being an accessory dwelling unit, which is tied to the primary parcel on the front yard, if you will, of the original lot, you can divide the lot in half and then finance those two homes separately and sell the backyard lot separately. So it is not an accessory dwelling unit. It is its own primary residence on a separate lot that has much more access to financing.
What I'm interested in, this concept's great, but the main thing that drives is greed. People build because they're going to make money. And I'm just wondering, how does that play into why would a developer want to develop one thing over the next? And how do you get that buy-in?
Yeah, I think so. So one thing that's really important about that is right now land costs, because we have fairly large minimum lot sizes in the city of Asheville, land cost drives a really significant portion of the sale price of a home. And so in order to make a profit on construction, developers try to lower the per square foot price of the house by building that house larger. And that allows them to sell the house for more total money, and make the construction cost a smaller percentage of what they're selling that house for, and sort of spread out the cost of the land. So by allowing more dwelling units on the same size parcel, or by allowing smaller parcels, you're able to reduce the amount of land cost. And it allows the developer to make a similar profit by selling, say, 5 condos that take up the same building footprint as one large single family home. So they're selling, they're you're correct. The developer's not going to build something unless they're a nonprofit developer. They're not going to make some money on it. And by allowing smaller units on the same lot size, we're allowing them to build a type of housing that a lot of people want, and then sell it for a lower price point because they have those economies of scale.
Okay, we have a question in the back and then we have more online.
Would it be a good thing to collaborate with other nonprofits such as Habitat? And also, are you working yet with the bus system?
Yes, and yes, we do collaborate closely with Habitat for Humanity and other affordable housing developers like Mountain Housing Opportunities. And somebody mentioned AARP recently. We had a panel discussion back in March, helping people think about the missing middle housing reforms that the study the city commissioned recommends. And our speakers on that panel were from Mountain Housing Opportunities, AARP, the Buncombe County Schools had a representative because teachers really want more housing and need more housing. The local Asheville chapter of YIMBY called Asheville for All, and then myself representing Mountain True. And there were a number of other organizations, including Habitat for Humanity, Pisgah Legal Services, that co-sponsored that event. We couldn't have all of our partners who are nonprofits be speakers on that panel, but the breadth of nonprofit community support for these kinds of reforms because of the need for housing and more attainable housing. Most of our nonprofit partners are really excited about this work and are on board with it. So that was the habitat question. And then the transit question, as I mentioned earlier, yes, Mountain True has advocated for decades to increase investments to our transit system. We are fully supportive of that. We push the city to fund more frequency of bus services, more routes, more funding for drivers so that we can have drivers to run those buses on the routes. I mean, we need to invest in our transit system for all kinds of reasons. And part of it is to mitigate those traffic concerns that someone else was concerned about. We need to have transit be a reliable, efficient alternative that people can choose to use because the system really works and works well. And in order for that to be the case, we need additional investments for it. So we advocate for that all the time.
There we go. It's back on. Anyway, first of all, let's give a hand to both of our presenters. What a great program. It's nice to know we've got people that have done the study, done the research, and have the facts and have a vision for where we need to go. So again, great work by them and something we all need to support, and for lots of good reasons. Thank you for coming out tonight. And I want to remind you again of our picnic on the 13th of July at Woodfin River Park, beautiful location, 12 to 3. And come back in August. First Wednesday in August. Our program then is going to be reasons to be optimistic about climate change, or reasons to have hope, and what you can do to reduce your own carbon footprint, to do your part to help us prevent the worst of climate change. So again, look forward to seeing you at our picnic, and again, back in August for great programs. If you're not already getting our newsletter, go to WNCSierraClub.org, sign up. There's still cards you can quickly sign to send to the Public Utilities Commission on your way out. Leave them and we'll mail them for you. So thanks again, and we really appreciate it.